Picture this. We're diving into a medical mystery today that honestly sounds like it was ripped straight out of a Hollywood sci-fi thriller. We're talking about an unseen, deadly pathogen, one that has been lurking in the shadows for literally decades. There's no vaccine for it and absolutely no known cure. It's a wild story that crosses continents, dips into military history, involves ancient tribal knowledge, and ultimately leads to a modern-day tragedy on a luxury cruise. So let's just jump right into how this silent threat recently made international headlines.
So how exactly does a 70-year-old hidden pathogen turn a high-end luxury voyage into a total nightmare? Let me set the scene for you. It's April 1st, 2026. A beautiful luxury cruise ship departs from Ushuaia, Argentina, heading out on this breathtaking once-in-a-lifetime voyage toward Antarctica and the remote islands of the South Atlantic. On board, you've got about 150 passengers and crew members from 23 different countries. And for the first few days, everything is picture perfect. People are socializing, there are parties, the drinks are flowing, and everyone is completely oblivious to the absolute tragedy that's about to strike. But then, right around day 5, the nightmare begins.
The speed at which things escalate is terrifying, honestly. 5 days in, a 70-year-old Dutch passenger suddenly comes down with a fever, a bad headache, and some mild stomach issues. Just a few days later, he literally cannot breathe. His condition tanks so incredibly fast that by April 11th, he dies right there on the ship. The cruise eventually manages to dock at St. Helena off the coast of Africa. The man's grieving wife disembarks with his body to fly home. She travels to South Africa, and on April 25th, right as she's waiting to board her flight back to Amsterdam, she collapses right in the middle of the airport. She dies the very next day. Meanwhile, back on the isolated ship, the horror isn't over. A German woman falls ill on April 28th and is gone by May 2nd. People are just dropping dead, and nobody has a clue why. Finally, the World Health Organization gets involved. They run the tests, and they deliver a shocking diagnosis.
When those WHO test results came back, the diagnosis sent absolute shockwaves around the globe. Hanta Virus. And the reason everyone panicked? Well, this virus carries a staggering mortality rate of up to 50%. Half of the people who get severely infected with certain strains of this bug simply do not survive. It's a coin flip. Suddenly, this ship, stranded out in the middle of the ocean, is front-page global news, and absolutely no country wants to let it dock.
Now, to really grasp why experts were panicking, we need to look at what we're actually dealing with here. Hanta Virus is not some brand new, scientifically engineered superbug. Actually, it's a family of deadly viruses that scientists have known about for around 70 years. It's carried by and spreads through different types of rodents. But here's the kicker. Despite knowing about it for 7 decades, medical science has still not developed an FDA or WHO-approved vaccine. There isn't even a proven antiviral cure. If you catch it, doctors can basically just give you supportive care, hook you up to oxygen, monitor your fluids, and hope for the best. Your immune system is entirely on its own to fight that battle.
What makes this virus particularly insidious is that it basically has 2 distinct, brutal personalities, and it just depends on where you live. Over in Asia and Europe, you primarily see HFRS. That's hemorrhagic fever with renal syndrome. This variant attacks your kidneys, causes them to fail, and triggers severe internal bleeding. On the flip side, in North and South America, you see HPS, Hanta Virus pulmonary syndrome. This is where your lungs rapidly fill with fluid, it makes it practically impossible to breathe, and it ultimately leads to suffocation. It is just a horrific way to go.
Let's rewind for a second, because to understand this pathogen, we have to look back at how we first bumped into it. Modern science's first major run-in with this virus happened way back during the Korean War in the 1950s. Over 3,000 American soldiers fighting in South Korea were suddenly struck down by this completely mysterious sickness. First, they'd get a fever and start vomiting, and then their kidneys would just shut down. The casualty rate was sitting right around 15%, and for nearly 30 years, doctors were totally stumped. They literally didn't know if it was a natural disease or some kind of secret chemical weapon. It wasn't until the 1980s that a South Korean virologist, Dr. Ho-Win Lee, finally found the virus hiding in local rodents. He named it after the nearby Hantan River, and the mystery was finally solved.
But honestly, the most dramatic chapter in the Hanta Virus story happened a lot closer to home for many of us. In May 1993, over just a matter of weeks, 10 members of the Navajo tribe in the American Southwest died suddenly. What made this outbreak so terrifying was that these victims were young, athletic, totally healthy people who just suddenly started suffocating. And the initial mortality rate during this outbreak, an unbelievable 75%. 3 out of every 4 people who got sick died. Modern scientists were completely baffled until they decided to consult the local tribal elders.
It turned out the Navajo oral history perfectly laid out the exact scientific chain of events that was happening. It was like a giant ecological domino effect. Step 1, the massive 1991 to 1992 El Niño weather pattern brought in all this unusually heavy rain. Step 2, that extra rain caused a huge boom in the growth of pinyon pine nuts. Step 3, with all that extra food lying around, the local rodent population absolutely exploded. And finally, step 4, with so many infected rodents running around in such close proximity to people, the virus inevitably spilled over into the human population. It was a literal masterclass in how environmental shifts can directly trigger deadly viral outbreaks.
And hey, you should know this isn't just a threat localized to the Americas or Korea. For the longest time, the scientific community assumed India was totally free of Hanta virus. Well, a major study done between 2005 and 2008 in the Vellore district of Tamil Nadu proved that assumption dead wrong. They uncovered 28 confirmed cases, specifically among warehouse workers and members of the Irula tribe, whose traditional livelihoods actually involve catching rats. When researchers went ahead and tested the broader local population, they found out that about 4% of people actually carried hantavirus antibodies. The reality is, it's a silent threat pretty much everywhere.
Okay, speaking of things spreading globally and silently disrupting our world, let's take a really quick pivot. While viruses disrupt our physical health, artificial intelligence is completely disrupting how we work right now. A lot of folks think AI is just asking a chatbot to write an email, but it is fundamentally replacing entire complex workflows that used to take teams of employees to do. If you don't learn how to harness this, you are going to be left behind, for sure. That is exactly why I put together a 3-hour live AI masterclass. I personally sit down and teach you over 30 of the most useful AI tools out there. You'll literally learn how to build a fully working website from scratch in about 5 minutes without writing a single line of code. We've had over 100,000 people take this class, and 91% rated it 4 or 5 stars. Our next session is coming up on May 31st, and it'll cost you about the same as 2 movie tickets. Link is down in the description. Go check it out.
All right, jumping right back into our medical mystery. We are faced with a pretty massive paradox here. Up until a very specific point in history, it was considered a hard, undeniable scientific fact that hantavirus only jumped from rodents to humans. It did not spread from person to person. So, if that was true, how on earth did it suddenly start spreading among a bunch of people isolated on a luxury ship floating in the middle of the ocean? The answer to that lies in a terrifying medical breakthrough from 1996. During an outbreak down in southern Argentina, scientists identified a very specific strain, the Andes virus. And this strain completely shattered all those previous medical assumptions because it possesses a very dangerous, newly documented ability, human-to-human transmission. Yep, out of the entire massive hantavirus family, the Andes strain is the only one scientifically proven to spread directly between people.
Now, how exactly does this Andes strain do its dirty work? Well, the good news, and it is very good news, is that it is not airborne like COVID or the flu. It requires very close, prolonged physical contact. We're talking exposure to bodily fluids, sleeping in the same bed, or being a direct caregiver to someone who's actively sick. But here is the most fascinating and honestly critical detail. The transmission window is incredibly short. An infected person is typically only contagious to others for one single day during the very early onset of their illness. That said, scientists have noticed that certain individuals act as superspreaders, passing the virus on to way more people than the average patient would.
So knowing everything we now know about the Andes strain, the fact that it can jump between humans, its need for super close contact, and that bizarrely tiny one-day window of contagion, we are left with one final burning question. Where did the outbreak on our 2026 luxury cruise ship actually start? Well, it all comes down to a really tragic combination of terrible luck and perfect timing. In March 2026, just days before the cruise, that Dutch couple who died first actually went on a birdwatching tour, and that tour took them right near a heavily rat-infested landfill in Ushuaia. Now remember that incredibly narrow one-day transmission window? They boarded the cruise ship on April 1st, exactly on the one day the husband was contagious. From there, just through normal close contact in the confined environment of a ship, the virus spread. By the time the ship finally found a port willing to let them dock, which was Tenerife on May 10th, after Cape Verde totally refused them, they had 10 confirmed cases on board and 3 deaths.
So, hearing all this, are we staring down the barrel of the next massive global pandemic? Well, take a breath, because according to the WHO, the global risk is actually quite low, and that is entirely thanks to the mechanics we just talked about.
It's not airborne, and the contagious window is so incredibly brief that we wouldn't need to implement 14-day global quarantines just to contain it. If an infected person is isolated for just a couple of days, the whole transmission chain just breaks. That being said, a 50% mortality rate is a massive wake-up call that we absolutely cannot afford to ignore.
Because of that crazy high mortality rate, and because climate experts are predicting some massive El Niño weather patterns this year, which, as we know, makes rodent populations explode, prevention is simply non-negotiable. You have got to seal up your home completely so mice and rats cannot get inside. If you're going out to clean a dusty old storage room, a garage, or a barn, throw on an N95 mask and some gloves so you don't accidentally inhale any aerosolized droppings. Maintain really strict hygiene, don't leave your food out on the counters, and dispose of your garbage properly in sealed bins. It's simple. Remove the attraction and you remove the risk.
Which brings us to our final thought for today. Are your home and your community truly secure against this unseen threat? See, Hanta Virus only really grabs the global headlines when a huge, dramatic tragedy like a cruise ship outbreak happens. But the chilling reality is, it has been quietly infecting people all around the world for decades. In a world where we still have no vaccine and no cure for this disease, your absolute best, and honestly, your only weapons are awareness and prevention. So stay informed, stay vigilant out there, and I'll see you in the next explainer.